My name is Tahira Mahdi. I am a community psychologist and consultant, former, or I guess still community journalist, and also a fiction writer. My training is actually comes from before I got my degree. So my bachelor's, master's, and PhD are from UMBC, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. The graduate level work was in human services psychology. That's actually the degree. And community psychology was the track, my specialty. So before that though, I was a community journalist, would take me out to the Go-Go magazine. Freelance writer, so did a lot of entertainment profiles. But having that kind of training is what allowed me to learn how to listen and also take different sides of a story, put those things together in order to make sure that a wider audience could get on the same page. And these days in my community psychology work, I use those same principles. I was trained in qualitative research, meaning you're interviewing people and getting, again, different sides of the story to get people on the same page. So with community psychology and my consulting work, I do program evaluation, and that also usually entails interviewing different people in order to make sure that programs and projects are working effectively. So when it comes to conflict resolution and mediation in communities, I usually say that I work with people who work with people. So that means that in organizations, businesses, especially colleges and universities, just different people who work with communities. I work with those people so that they can use my techniques, my trainings, my workshops to learn how to do their own jobs a lot better when it comes to community mediation. Well, my research is research, and the thing that I kind of study continuously is a concept called community membership, and that's taken from the sense of community construct that's found within community psychology literature. So my research, I studied the go-go music cultural community. So for those of you who aren't from the DMV and kind of knowing how important go-go music is to our area, we're looking at go-go as a culture and as a community, and with that community structure, by doing qualitative interviews and studying how membership works for that community, I realized that it actually does not. So because I found some kind of construct that I called being of the community, now that opens up my minds, and I hope to let my clients' minds open up to the possibility that communities have a lot of different types of structures. So one of the other things that I do is have people go through exercises about the communities they belong to. And that's one of the things that helps people kind of get on the same page when we're realizing it's not I'm in this community, you're from that community. Each of us have different communities that we belong to, and kind of finding out more about each other in those kinds of ways. It really helps. I've been doing this for years, and I'm also an adjunct professor at UMBC, so doing this with classes, just making sure that people seeing their similarities, different types of communities they belong to, cultural interest groups. I had a whole half of a class once get on the same page because they all like anime. So when certain organizations, when the organizations that I work with, universities, businesses, when they work with me in workshops, trainings, things like that, what I'm doing is showing them how the construct of being of the community, meaning you don't have to be of someone's community. I don't have to say I am this thing, but I can be in a community with that person with a boundary of respect. I also make room for what's called potential community, meaning I'm not in your community right now. I might even be opposed to your community right now. But when we get to the level called supportive community, that means that through love and support, we can still be in community together, and I don't have to assert myself as one of you. And then eventually, the core community says you are one of us. So that opens up to a lot of our different cultures that are not modeled after Western culture. There are a lot of different cultures that welcome other people in just based on that love and support and other feeling. But we can be in community with one another, cross communities. Our communities can overlap without having to be exactly the same. And being taken through workshops and things like this with groups of people who might be on different pages, I've seen them be able to find common ground through my research and the things that I talk about in my workshops. Challenges, in my opinion, one of the main challenges is that so many people who are in conflict within their communities are facing historical oppression. So we're talking hundreds of years of being oppressed in communities before you and communities who look like you, even all over the world, are being oppressed. So when you find yourself in a situation that's in conflict, it's not really out of that context of hundreds of years of things being done to you intentionally because of race, because of gender, anything else you can think of why people oppress other people. It's challenging, just like anybody else who has something that they want to promote. Doing the work is easy enough. So doing my research, it was difficult, but it's easier than getting the word out to other people. Even a place like the Conflict Resolution Center is, I hadn't heard of it. So now my job is to spread the word. This is something that exists. And people who have things like this, who have services, they know. Part of the challenge is getting people to know that it's there. When I work with people, I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, but also interdisciplinary artist. So that means I work with journalists, people in the entertainment industry, historians, public health scholars, public humanities scholars, all these kinds of people whose job it is to tell the histories of people, tell people stories, and have people work with one another, because the whole goal is the improvement of society in general, which is the whole goal of conflict resolution and all that stuff anyway. So we're not, we have ways to try to make community with each other and have that peace that we talk about. But it's very challenging to have to go back in history and face that and have people understand that even in their conflicts that they're having right now, it is not out of this historical context. So between my work showing people current contexts of communities, the different communities to which they belong, how these communities intersect, how much they have in common with somebody else who's from another community, cultural or otherwise. I also talk about boundaries in my work. Now there's personal boundaries, like social boundaries, but there are also boundaries that have been created, again, hundreds of years ago by people who use those boundaries to oppress people. It's usually when you start going back in history and finding out how things came to be, boundaries were drawn because maybe this state wanted slaves and this state said, no, we're not going to do that right now. Or somebody else who was getting land from an ocean away from them drew boundaries and said, this belongs to these people. And we're still holding on to those boundaries today. One of the scholars that I work with is Dr. Lawrence Brown, who his book is The Black Butterfly, but The Black Butterfly is also a project, and it goes back into the history of segregation in Baltimore. So you can see different things like this all over the country where patterns of segregation that were enacted in the early 1900s are still impacting people's lives to this day. And communities and people in communities who are in conflict are just not out of that context. So just getting the word out about the services that we provide is a challenge in itself. Also getting people to know about the historical context of it. And I did try another approach. So I'm also a fiction writer, and I have a new book called This Is Not How It Was Supposed to Go. So my intention was to write a fictional story that encapsulated my research and my work and what it means to have even an individual who's in a depressed state, and how the community can come together, or having community can help you kind of get yourself back together mentally for your mental health. But getting the word out about it again is the challenge. So that's something that I see, getting to understand the historical context and then getting the word out about how many people are trying to work to help us heal within our communities. I don't work directly with conflict resolution and mediation. However, I do work with people who are attempting to come together through what might be those historical contexts that I talked about. So I work with communities and organizations and scholars who are facing gentrification, food deserts, schools closing, things like that are, even though it comes from that historical oppression, the current circumstance of it are trying to get city officials to understand what's happening, trying to get developers to understand what this context is, trying to get people to put people over profits. So getting people in the room to be on the same page. Again, I talk about different communities to which we belong. I do go through that history. I learned a technique actually from kind of ear hustling somebody else's Zoom meeting during the pandemic when everybody was virtual, and they talked about something called the 5 whys. And I heard somebody explain that if you have an issue, you ask why 5 times so you can kind of get to the root of it. And a lot of us scholars do that, and I keep saying scholars because that's where I work with the most, but people who work in the communities where they're trying to do community gardens or trying to get people better health care, mental health care in communities, they do want to find out what the root cause of that is. So once I started kind of going back saying why, I got all the way back to the Virginia Slave Act of 1705, even different ways in which people were punished. If you're serving as white, they're punished this way. If you're serving as black, you punish them this way. All these different laws of the land that sound really ridiculous, but these were the laws of our land, and these are the things that they're actually fighting against us knowing now, when it should be that, hey, look how far we've come. And even how far we've come, kind of taking people through that in some of my workshops, just to show them that context and why it matters and why it is important for us to learn ways of resolving issues with one another. And I believe it is successful because I can tailor my workshops to different groups and organizations. And when we start exploring community and undoing what we already thought about community, looking at things in a different way, and it's not always to change someone's mind, but just either a perspective shift or even a broadening of perspective can do so much for an individual in his or her work. And people who work in conflict resolution, that's just such a particular skill. But thinking of other things about communities and about culture that you might not even knew that you had kind of put in the back of your mind. I kind of bring that kind of stuff to the forefront of your mind. So these are the ways in which I help the people who help the people. One of the things that I like to do is address conflict resolution within ourselves. So if you're like me, you have a lot of different interests. I have that academic thing, the PhD thing, I have the fiction writer thing, I have the entertainment writing thing, and it used to feel like 2 different people being at conflict. And I really like the fact that the more I resolve the conflict internally, the more I'm likely to be able to be a part of processes that solve conflicts externally. So resolving the fact that I love research, academic language, and kind of being with the people with the letters, but I love the fact that my fiction writing has adult language and adult situations, because that's still like another way to reach a wide group of people with certain themes that I would like to talk about with academic audiences. So the more me that I am, and the more I'm not angry at myself for not doing a certain thing and not doing it the right way, the more grace I give myself, the more grace I give to other people. And that's something that I like sharing with audiences, bringing our whole selves forward so that people can love us for who we are when we love ourselves for who we are, and celebrate all the craziness and then resolve it so we can do this piece by piece.